and we are meeting for the Finance, Personnel, and Operations Committee. We have members, Chair Figdor, Member Bryden, and myself present from the committee, and Member Grant with us as well. The agenda tonight has two parts. First is to focus in on capital improvement projects, both existing and recommendations for upcoming and the next fiscal year. And then we're going to spend some time getting updates on our recommendations related to our audits of the past couple fiscal years, talk about the finance department, and talk about the superintendent search. And then we'll adjourn. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Superintendent.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We wanted to start with just a little bit of an overview of what CIP Capital Improvement Plan is. I know that most of you know this, but I don't know that everyone in the public does, and it might just be helpful for us to review, since this is our first conversation about CIP in, close to a year. So I think it would be helpful to just talk a little bit about what it is, how it figures into our operations as a school district, both in terms of what we do, but also in terms of, our budget and so on. So, just at a high level, CIP stands for Capital Improvement Projects. So as the name suggests, those are, large construction type projects and other large investments that are durable in nature. So things that, that you buy, now and you will have for a number of years. And so primarily for us, what CIP is major construction, major upgrades and repairs to our buildings, and our bus fleet is largely bought that same way. So as part of CIP, because those are durable goods that we hold on to for upwards of 10 years. So buses, in general, we have for up to 15 years. So that's why they're often purchased under CIP. CIP is the funds come to the district as through the purchase of bonds. We do not have bonding capability as a district, so and will not have that even if question 5 were to be approved by the voters. So we will continue to do our bonding directly through the city of Portland. The way that CIP works at this time is that, we go with our request, which is what you are going to be working on, starting with this meeting. And, eventually that will go to the city manager. The city manager will incorporate their recommendation from what it is that we advance to to them. They will incorporate it into the overall request that they will make of the city council, and the city council ultimately approves the CIP. CIP shows up in our budget as debt. So when you're dealing with the budget, as we do every year, you will see a significant portion of our budget is tied up in debt service, and that is, in essence, the principal and interest payments that we make on these purchases that we are, that we're making through our CIP requests. And so that is the primary source of debt service. Other things that go into debt service is also, through bonding. So it's in all cases, it's paying off bonds. But, you know, our bonding is for these annual capital improvement projects, but it also is, for example, the forest school bond. And so if you think of the renovations that are happening at all four of our elementary schools right now, those are the result of a $64 million bond. So every year for the next so many years, we will be paying, basically a mortgage, principal and interest on the bond that was taken out to pay for that. And then other major sort of bonds that the city or the district have entered into, and one that you will hear often is the pension obligation bond. So that is a bond that the city, that the city entered into approximately 20 years ago now, to pay outstanding pension obligations. So underfunded pensions that needed to be shored up. And so, at one point there was a pension obligation bond that is ending in 2026. So you'll hear us talk, and you'll hear the city talk about what will we do once that that payment that is currently looming heavy because it's towards the end of its life. Once that payment is removed from our debt service, from our collective debt service as a city and as a school district. The sort of the sources of funding for our CIP, as I mentioned, one is the bonds, the city's purchase of or selling of bonds and taking the proceeds from that sale and using it for these projects. And then for us, we also have for the past few years been able to access state revolving renovation funds. And so that is a fund that the state has in place that is issued annually, that school districts apply for annually, that is designed to pay for, sort of medium-sized projects. And so, if you, and when we get into the details of our requests, you'll begin to see some of this. You'll see that many of our projects over the past couple of years have been, they're reflected in our CIP because there's still bonding that happens, but it's at a significantly reduced cost than when we just put it on the city's bonding and it goes out. And so because the way that the state revolving renovation fund works is 30% of the cost of that bond is sort of wiped off our, off of our payments because the state takes that on. And then in addition to that, the bonds are all 0% interest. So we're paying principal only, and the principal is 70% of what we actually borrowed. And so that's, one of the sources that we've been able to tap under Steve's leadership for the past few years. And we've been able, and we'll be doing that again, as we go forward. So that's, in sort of broadly what CIP is. We, for the past few years, have gotten, as I think last year we were somewhere just north of $2 million. We had 3.5 for the previous couple years, and going back before that was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to I think as low as $1.5 million in CIP. The way that amount is figured is, like so many things of this nature, a negotiation and a conversation with the city The city obviously has, tremendous needs. The way that strategically the city council has decided to do this is that they're only adding onto their debt whatever it is that they're retiring on an annual basis. So they're trying not to add, additional principal that is going to raise the debt service for the district, for the city overall. So, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of, it's been, $14 million at times. And this year is projected to be about $10 million for the city altogether to be able to bond. That's what we've been told by the city council or by the city manager and the finance director, that we expect that the city's overall bonding is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 million. So as we engage today around what it is that we are, thinking and how we're approaching it, that figure is part of what we're taking into consideration. So I'm going to pause, take a breath, and see if you have any questions on this before we move on.
Chair Figdor.
Superintendent, thank you so much for this overview. I think it is extremely helpful for the public as well as perhaps for the new members. I think is a piece of that, if you can talk about the assessment that was done in 2017 on our capital needs. I think that also provides context in terms of what we're doing in this committee.
Yeah. So, I appreciate that. We did in 2017 what we called the you'll hear us refer to it as the facilities assessment or the Sebago Technics report. I don't actually know if it's on our new website. If not, we've got to get it in there because it is something that people often look for. It's a very comprehensive look at all of our physical assets as a school district, all of our building assets. So not just our schools, but also central administration, our food service building, et cetera, et cetera. And, looked at over a, 20-year period, what would we expect our capital needs to be. So whether because they get old and they, go beyond their useful life, as well as by looking deeply at the things that we currently had and seeing what needed to be repaired and so on. And so in 2017, so this is in, 2017 dollars, and in construction, that's sort of, a long time ago. There were $320 million worth of capital expectations from the district that we would see over those 20 years. And so, like, for example, if you recall, we talked at the board meeting about, the high schools and each of them having, at least $40 million worth of repairs that would be needed over 20 years. That came out of the facilities assessment. And again, I think it is important, and we haven't done a new one, and it's expensive to do and time consuming and all of that. But, that was in 2017 dollars, which is, considerably less than what it would be today. So if you sort of do the math on it, it's, over the life of the, sort of the duration of that study, which was looking, was it 20 or it was 15 years into the future, right, Steve? Trying to think, it was 15. So, because I know that
20 years.
So it's like somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 million a year. And it's not even like that, but, the way that we've been talking about it, it's like we would have needed to be putting $15 million into our schools to be able to keep pace with that $320 million in expected capital expenses. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we're putting in, 4 million in a banner year and, 1.5 in a really bad year. So, I think what you can obviously figure out on your own is that as a result of that, there are things that we should be doing that we are not doing. And, the needs will continue to grow. And, our work and the work of developing the CIP is about figuring out, what are the most pressing needs that we can't ignore, and how many of those can we do with the limited amount of money that we are going to get, because we're not going to be able to do them all. Was that helpful, Emily? Was that what you were looking for?
Precisely. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So what we wanted to do next was to spend a little bit of time talking about our update on existing projects. And I think this is important. I know that Chair Burke, that you were a part of this conversation last year, so you know that we have the other side of the coin of getting these funds is like we actually have to be able to do the projects that are funded. And as a result of the pandemic, as a result of the fact that we're running 4 major school renovation programs, and the sort of the pressure on the construction industry from the pandemic and all of the other accompanying issues with supply chains and things along those lines, we've fallen significantly behind. And so that also frankly figures into how much we should be asking for. And because it's as you'll see as we're going to talk about this, there are a significant number of projects that are in the works but are not executed on, that are currently have been bonded, and the money is sitting there waiting for us to actually act on that. So if you go to the board docs, second item on the agenda, the update on the existing projects, we wanted to spend a little bit of time, and I'm going to ask Steve and I'm assuming Tamara to walk us through the existing projects. And let me just sort of orient you to what you see there is, for each of those projects, you see the, city project number that basically tells you what year it was bonded. So what year it was a part of our CIP. Then the school, whether it's funded through the state revolving renovation fund that I mentioned earlier. So the one where it's 30% of the principal is written off and it's interest free. And then, what the project is, the estimate, and what the status is of the project. So I did not update this from what we talked about this morning, Tamara. So I know. Okay. I asked that we take off the completed projects and all of that. So I'm assuming, I know that there's not a ton of them on there. So when you walk through it, just the ones that are completed obviously shouldn't be on here. As Terry said to me, like one of the fun things about making these lists is being able to check things off. And we should definitely do that by getting rid of the things that we've actually completed. Absolutely. Accomplishments. So, and the way that these are organized is we've tried to group them in sort of categories, and you'll see that that is also tied into, significant amount of the way that we've approached our requests from the state is in these sort of buckets of categories, which are aligned with the things that they are prioritizing. So ADA, Americans with Disability Act projects was a big focus. And so we got substantial funding from the DOE to be able to do those projects. And so we've got a number of projects that are all consolidated under the label of ADA, fire safety, HVAC, and then building envelope and miscellaneous. So that's, those are sort of subheadings within this spreadsheet. Does everybody have the spreadsheet, have access to it? Okay. And Tamara, do you want me to put it up on, do you want to put it up?
It would be, either way, it would be helpful to have it up probably.
Okay. And do you want to do it yourself, or do you want, I can make you post to pull it up because you have an updated one, I'm assuming, from what I
Sure.
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 So, okay. I'm going to make you co-host, and then you can share your screen and walk us through.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Bear with me 1 second here. Share.
Perfect. Thank you.
Are you seeing it? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I'll just start walking through the spreadsheet if anybody has any questions, or maybe, do them one section at a time. We'll start with the ADA Project 1 priorities. There are multiple schools that we had ADA project CIP put in for, and we also applied for SRRF money back in FY20. That was having to be done at the end of August of this year. We finished a few of the door hardware chairlifts at a couple of the schools. The remainder of the schools we put out to bid last year or earlier this year, and we received no bids back. So we were not able to complete these projects in time. So we have spoken to the state, and we are going to be reapplying for these funds and for FY23. And we would be bidding these out in smaller groups to hopefully gain some interest in contractors bidding on the packages. Anybody have any questions on the first group? Or
can I add to that?
Sure.
Well, with Tamara, thank you. The ADA package SRRF group, or the Revolving Fund group, was put out to bid, and no bidders on the total package of all those projects together, totaling 2.234 mil. So then we took another step with the architect engineer, Simon's Architect, to go and solicit to the subcontractors pricing on smaller parts of each one of these schools, not everyone, but certain parts if they would be interested. And for example, for 4 bathroom renovations at the Talbot School, just 4 bathrooms, it came in at $360,000. And also for 2 handrails to be installed in the King Middle School on a 2-level stairwell was close to $200,000. So $900,000 to get a tiny piece. This is the market that we're dealing with right now. Incredibly expensive, and couldn't guarantee that the work could be done in the summer and ready for school. So as Tamara said, we're regrouping with the state. We're going to reapply, break it down into smaller, manageable packages, and try to get all of these completed under the SRRF loan program.
So in sum, there's $2.2 million in CIP requests that we're going to basically have to reissue, right? Because these were all predicated on getting them funded through the state revolving renovation fund. And even though they've shown up in our CIP, there's no actual money that we're going to need to do again in order to be able to do these projects.
And we did complete through the district in these schools, the lift in Daring High School that was added. And we did the door hardware package. And we were communicating with the state on the upcoming deadline and asked for another extension. And they replied to us that to reapply, you've had 2 extensions, so you need to reapply. So that again is the market that we're dealing with as far as Portland Public Schools, as well as every other school that's in this SRRF program. It's a 6-month wait on any of the local engineering firms that we deal with, Allied Engineering, Woodard and Curran. If I were to take any one of these projects that need and require engineering, it would be a 5 to 6 months before they could initiate the project. We're expecting or have experienced any type of delivery on HVAC equipment from 8 to 12 months. The time frame on an SRRF loan is 18 months, and we need to do the work in the summer. So we have 3.5 to 4 months. So
That's a tough Gantt chart, Stephen. I see Member Bryden has her hand up.
So my question is, I'm curious whether, and obviously nobody has a crystal ball, but I'm curious whether the expectation is that this is just like the new way that things are going to be, or is there an expectation that costs would go down at some point? I'm trying to get a sense of, with your expertise, what you think might happen in the medium to long term.
I would guess a 3-year period of experience in the construction industry of escalated in inflationary pricing, the supply chain issues. I would say a 3-year period.
And then prices won't necessarily come down. It would be that there will be more competition. So there might be some, decreases, but we're not going to go back to what it was, in 2017. It's going to just not grow as fast.
Yeah. Is the hope that the timing issues might ease up in a couple of years, 3 years? Hopefully, or?
Well, I think in a three-year period, looking at our portfolio here, is the grouping of buckets are, I think, effective. However, if we're looking for a loan under the guidelines and time frame of that loan, we need to break them down further into smaller, manageable projects, to sequence it out, which we tried to do with the subcontractors, as I said, with the ADA components, and identified in the Sevago Technics assessment is where we're pulling a lot of this information from 217 and correlating that with the 6-year plan of CIP. And as Javier's talked about, we'll look at why we have $9 million of CIP not retired, and how do we go about that in a stop really focusing on a 1-year, $2 million work project when we should be looking at 3 years and $6 million. And a timeline that we can divide, that we can do the work in the summers, because that's when we can do this type of major work.
Yeah, I was just, I was looking for and did get a slightly better understanding in terms of the landscape and the context. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Member Bryden. Thanks, Stephen. Tamara, do you want to take us back into the spreadsheet, or where do we want to go from here?
Sure. We can go to the next, we'll go to project 2, fire safety. So there are 5 projects under that umbrella, and we have we haven't started these at all. We're going to look at soliciting design services for install in summer of 2023 on these 5. Is there anything more on that, Steve? Is that pretty much it?
With the exception of Deering High School, it says replace AC. No, where's the fire panel?
No, the fire.
Fire panel. Yeah, we replaced the fire panel. This is the sprinkler system. This project's been for 10 years.
It's been sitting for,
You have to dig across Stevens Avenue. It's an 8-month project at best. And if you put that in summer work, it's a 4-summer project.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we need to talk about, okay, we have a new fire panel in, we've maintained our sprinkler system. It's old, but it still works. It's still in code. It's still being inspected by our vendors. So we have some time. Where would we do, and what will we do with looking at 1.255 million in the reality of doing this job with kids in that school in less than a 4-year period of time in the summers is not realistic, regardless of what environment we're in inflation and cost.
So where it says there, solicit design services for install in summer of 2023, you're not actually going to do that.
Well, I will go for engineering on it, Javier. Yeah, I will get an engineering plan, a phase scope of work, and see if it does verify what I just said, a 3-summer project, a 4-summer project, 2-summer project, and an estimate of costs.
And this was, I remember this because it was like in my first year or so. And this $1.2 million, is that still going to do that project?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was from 2017 price, so we're looking at 45 to 50% increase in the current market.
Yeah.
So all these system upgrade, all this came from the Sebago assessment. So should I move on? Okay, move on to projects.
These are not state revolving renovation fund.
No.
Okay.
So the SRRF has certain categories, and for example, for FY23, they're only taking priority ones. Back in FY20, they were taking priority 1s, 2s, and 3s. At this point, they're only taking priority 1s. So that does not.
One is ADA.
That was no, it's not necessarily ADA. It's
life safety, I think.
Yeah. So the state told me to reapply in hopes that we can get the ADA stuff. That's what I'm not sure we're going to get it approved, but that's what she had asked me to reapply with the FY23. But yeah, priority 1s is what the application shows.
Each year that they offer the SRRF, they categorize a certain envelope component of school structures and make that a priority 1. ADA was a priority 1 in 2020. In 2022, when we applied for priority 1 was air quality.
Mm.
So your projects had to meet the requirements of the state for air quality improvements within schools.
Which in this next group, Project 3 HVAC, you'll notice that there's a few on here that were SRRFs that we applied for, and that are current SRRF projects. For example, Lyman, is that?
That's
Lincoln Middle School, sorry.
Yeah.
More middle schools down below, but Lincoln's up here. Moore's on there, Paths, and King Middle School, all for air quality HVAC projects. I'll be meeting with the city in the next couple of weeks to see what their capacity is to try and get these completed in the next year.
We had conversations with our city partners with our memorandum of understanding on our HVAC equipment when we applied for the SRRF loan. They have 2 city engineers, and they didn't have capacity to even look at it as of today. And that's what we're going to meet on and find out. But as we look at this list of things that should be crossed off is the Talbot AC replace 40-ton chiller with 50-ton plus. That project will be done in a week and a half.
Right. Yeah.
So there's 660,000 out of the total of it.
Deering was completed, and Deering High School was completed with the air handling and the AC. And then Talbot will be getting completed in the next week and a half. Yeah.
So I have a question, and also kind of a process question, because just looking at our time, it seems like we could go by line to understand the precise status of each of these projects. But overall, where we're at is 1.2 million of 9 million that we have kind of bonded since 2019 has been utilized, and the remaining almost 8 million is sitting stuck because of all those constraints that have been identified so far. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess I look to my colleagues. Do you all want to keep going through kind of line item by line item here to understand? Because the details matter. I mean, these are important projects. They affect the quality of our buildings and like some of it's life safety stuff. It's not inconsequential stuff that we're talking about here at all, but also want to be able to have kind of the whole of the conversation that we're aiming to have, both related to capital improvement projects as well as the other side of the conversation tonight. So, so members of the committee, what do you need at this point in the conversation is my question. And Superintendent, after we hear from that, if there's something that you know we need to hear before we move on, please speak to that as well.
Yeah.
I don't think I need to go line by line. I'm happy to defer to the staff's judgment on what we should hear about at the moment. You know, what's urgent.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And also just in terms of the goals for this meeting, are we hoping to walk away from this meeting with some sort of decision about where to focus that $8 million worth of funding, or and also, maybe a couple sentences on how staff and finance committee members, how the interplay works there. I'm just not.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing is let's not go through this at the level of detail. I think it's important for you to have that. I think it's important for the public to see it as well. So I think that that's what we wanted to achieve by putting this level of detail out there. Sort of the headline, I think, to Chair Burke's point. The headline is we've got a bunch of projects that have already been funded that we have not been able to see through for all of the reasons that we've described. So I think that's, the headline. The sub-headline of that is that, some of these projects may not actually ever happen for the reasons that Steve, talked about. So, for example, if you look at all of those ADA projects, they were funded out of SRRF, and if we don't get refunded for that, we'll have to put them back into CIP. But it's not like we're not sitting on that $2.2 million because that is a state grant that we were not able to complete the projects in and that we're now reapplying for. So I think that's the sub-headline. So I think with that, we can move on. The one thing that I do want to point out to you is in the building envelope, that first item is, the phase 1 roof replacement and engineering at Portland High School. And that's going to figure into our next conversation, which is what we're going to propose for FY 24. CIP. So that I think is important. And so I don't know, we can just get to it when we get to that other piece, but just know that there was engineering done on the Portland roof. So I think those are the main things. To Member Bryden's question in terms of the interplay, ultimately, the CIP is something that the board will vote on and will then become our request from the city, which we may or may not get, as I pointed out at the beginning. But I think it's important to, you are making decisions. Like, we're going to put in front of you the 6-year CIP, and, we're going to need to make some decisions about what we're going to advance. That's how we got to all of these projects. Every year we've brought, packages to the board, and the board has said, do these, can we do more? Can we do less? And so I think, that's the sort of the thrust of this used to be in our old structure. The operations committee did this particular function. It wasn't the finance committee that did this because of the way that the timing works for other important finance work, which is, very heavy during the budget. We think that this makes sense as a grouping of the committees, because this is kind of a fall activity and the budget is a spring activity. So does that
just
help?
To make sure, sorry to talk over you at the end there, just to make sure I understand. So the role of the staff would be to make recommendations and basically tee up all the information and yes.
Yes, and then to follow through on the execution of the project once we have the funding.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. So thanks, Tamara, for guiding us through that. And then can you bring up, while you're driving, can you bring up the 6-year CIP, which is the next item on the agenda? The staff recommendation for FY24.
Is it this one?
Yep. So just to orient you to this, and I don't actually know, it's always been a 6-year CIP. I don't know what's magic about 6 versus 10 versus, 5, but it's a 6-year CIP is the way that these things work. And I don't know, Steve, is there like a construction reason why it's a 6-year CIP, or is that just like sometime they decided to do 6 years and that's just how it is?
No, there's no reason I'm aware of, only that it's 6 because it's inclusive of this year, looking forward 5. And it expands to 10, and as you see, 5, and then beyond. Yeah. I have no answer. I don't know how you.
Okay. So what you see there is what we call the 6-year CIP. And so that includes, as Steve said, the last, couple of years. Last year was FY23 and the previous year, FY22. So those are and what you see on the spreadsheet are the projects that were funded. So Tamara, if you scroll down to the bottom on that.
All the way down, or how far?
All the way where you see the sum, at the bottom. So, it was $2 million in FY22, $3.2 million in FY23. Right? And then let's talk about what's on tap for FY24, which, as you can see before we scroll back up to the top, you can see is $3.9 million is what we project into this CIP. And again, just to remind you, the overall city's CIP request is $10 million. So, that's a 40% of of how much will be available. So highly unlikely that even if we were to advance all of these projects, which we're not proposing to do, but this is the way that this is generally done, is we take all of the things that were in the previous year that didn't get funded, roll them into the next year, along with the things that were projected to be in that year. And that's how you get to, what as you can see, are, increasingly larger numbers and increasingly larger numbers as you go through. So if you scroll back up to the top, you'll see what's on tap for this year. So do you want to walk us through those, Steve and Tamara, so that people understand what's being requested?
Sure. The first one is, so the last couple of years we've been doing door access controls at different schools. So it's kind of a phased. So we're doing the third and final phase of that door access controls. I guess the 3 school buses are listed on here.
Yep.
And then we have the Portland High School roof replacement. So you saw in the other spreadsheet, we had done engineering. We have a beam replacement for the Portland High School roof that we need to do before we can do the roof replacement. This came off of, I believe, the Sebago assessment to replace the roof. Then we have Lincoln Middle School, reworking the corridors and lockers. Paths, installing a freight elevator. More Middle School, providing a secure entrance vestibule in the store, in the front of the school. I just lost my C.
The emergency generators.
Yeah, replace emergency generators at Paths and Casco Bay. Peaks Island, addressing ponding issues along Island Avenue. King Middle School, replacing glass block in the storefronts. Paths, replacing the CTE program casework. Portland High School, replacing family consumer science area. Deering High School, replacing inbound electrical service. And PRS. Remind me what that. Oh, Presumpscot. New fire service and fire alarm system. And most of these items came from the assessment.
And as you know, excuse me, Tamara, Presumpscot's renovation is inclusive of that replacement. We're doing this in the renovation.
Oh, then it doesn't. Okay, well, then that's something we should remove.
So that should not be on this.
That should not be on there.
Okay.
Then we need to remove it. Okay.
All right. Just as an aside on that note, I think it's fortuitous but helpful to have that be on there. One of the values of doing the 4-school renovation is, if you think of the 2017 $320 million, when we did a crosswalk of what was to be funded out of the bond and for the renovations, which went beyond just basic systems, to sort of improving the quality of the experience at the schools. But there was a very significant reduction in that $320 million. I don't remember exactly what it was, Steve, but somewhere in the neighborhood of, $35 to $40 million of the bond was also going to address things that would otherwise show up in our 6-year, 10-year, 20-year CIP. So, there was some, significant reduction of that $320 million by virtue of the $64 million bond. It wasn't like the $64 million were, crossed off the list, because, as I said, there were lots of other things that were included in the renovations that wouldn't have been on the basic systems analysis that the Sebago Technics report included. But this is an example of something that we just should have cleared from here, because it's been done through that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the total, and as you can see that at the bottom, total somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.9, which really should be 3.5 or 3.6 based on the removing that project from the fire alarm system. So given where we are with all of the all of the projects that are on our plate, as well as the the backlog of projects which we just talked about, what we're bringing forward is our request for next for the FY24 is to seek funding for the Portland High School roof replacement. So that 1.8 million, which again is combined with some of what you saw on the previous spreadsheet. The engineering work is, I'm going to let you guys, it's somewhere in the process, right? That we are already, engineering is in process to be able to get that up and running. And there is already a substantial chunk of money and project that is out to bid now to do some beams that are necessary before you do the rest of the roof. And I've said more than I should have said. So
no, but you're correct. We combined the opportunity with SRRF and the air quality priority. Surprisingly, the state looks at roof structure as an air quality issue. If you think about it, you have a roof that has holes in it, water in your building, mold, and bad air quality. So they had a constraint that $250,000 for structural repair only. And we applied for that, and we have till September to complete that. Correct. Our engineering process in agreement with Allied Engineering is a project management and design contract. They're finishing at this shortly here, within hopefully the end of the week, beginning of next week, to have the RFP package constructed with the city to go through the procurement to hire a contractor to do this structural repairs of the beams. Some of the beams are, quite old. They're still structurally sound, but to put a new roof on and the weights that we're looking at on the new roof and different specification and codes requirements now for a roof. We'll have the structure in place, steel married to the old timbers, and in that agreement with Allied Engineering, after we get the structural part tied to the SRRF, we have a request for 1.8 million for Allied to continue the project and to take an RFP to the street for a complete re-roof of the Portland High School. So that's what we're requesting on the Portland High School.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Member Bryden.
Despite the steep learning curve notwithstanding, this is a really helpful conversation. I'm curious whether there exists anywhere a document that has not just the project title and the dollar amount, but also relevant data points like risk assessment, whether the project has already started, whether it's in progress, things like that would sort of factor into this prioritization conversation. I mean, setting aside the roof, that's fixing the roof sounds like it's the right thing to do. But at least from my perspective, it looks like basically, it's like a wall of numbers, and I can't, if we're being asked to make decisions about which items to fund and which items not to fund, it feels like not the right universe of information, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the information that you're asking for is not less information, it's more information, right? So the Sebago Technics report, I think, Tamara referenced that all of these things, by and large come out of that. We did not do that this year, but can. In the past, we've actually looked at all of these projects, crosswalk them to the Sebago Technics report. And I don't remember, Steve, you probably do, what the designation was, but it was something like, was this something that was labeled as a must be done within the next 0 to 5 years, the next 5 to 10 years, the next 10 to 15 years. And then there was another sort of criterion that was whether it was the end of its useful life, it was, in disrepair. I don't remember what those designations are, but we can go back and do that for everything on this list.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying, I want the staff to spend time putting together a spreadsheet just because you folks are bored. Like, I know, I'm not asking for, folks to spend time and energy on something that's not going to be useful for everybody. I'm just trying to get at the sense of, again, to what extent is the staff already looking at that stuff and making a recommendation based on that? And to what extent do we as board members need that information so we can make the decisions? That's all I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can do it, and it is, it is good practice, and we're like slammed and trying to get through lots of different things, so we didn't do it primarily. I'll be honest with you, because we're not gonna. It is our strong recommendation. Like, we think we can get the roof done. We don't think we can get any of these other projects done, right? They're gonna, if we do that, it's gonna add to that $9 million or $8 million of projects that were, in various, so like when you ask the question of, something that tells you where we are with the projects, that's what you saw in the other spreadsheet, right? For each of those, we can tell you where we are. None of these are projects that we've started.
And that hypothetical column of do we think we can get this done? That's a very important column. Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's where, as we talked about it and thought both about what we can done and what we can get done and what we think is reasonable to ask for, given the constraints on the city's overall CIP request, that's where we landed at, what amounts to roughly $2 million with the roof and the 3 buses. And I didn't mention it, and we didn't bring it, but we actually have a 10-year, like the state makes us keep a list of, a 10-year bus replacement schedule. So these 3 buses would be bus number whatever, and bus number whatever. And you would see that they were purchased in, 2012 or, whatever it might be, and are, now at the end of their life and time to be replaced. So, so I think that's the thrust of where we are. What we're asking for you to consider and to deliberate on is, just the $2 million request that includes the roof for Portland High School and the transportation request. And then, what we would do is bump everything else over into, 2025, bringing that total to whatever the difference is, another couple $1 million that would go into that. But if you seriously want to look at, what's the sort of where does reworking corridors and lockers figure in the Sebago Technics report, we can do that work.
Javier, are you looking for action from this committee this evening on that $2 million?
We're not near that point with the city, so I do think that we can, push this into the next meeting. I definitely wanted to get us started on the conversation. I know I spoke to Danielle yesterday. They're finishing their ARPA, this month and next month, and they're going to take up the CIP starting in December.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want reactions from the committee at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think
further questions.
around this issue of like, are you ready? Because we could, if you're ready to say like, yeah, it makes sense to go with, $2 million requests and include those two things, then, we can just bring that formally to you, with documentation for the other projects as you discussed. But, if there's something else you want, we can also do that.
Okay. So
I do want to just spend 1 minute on this. So we've also looked at what are some additional projects. So at the very bottom of this sheet, this is an initial analysis based on, so now the Sebago Technics report is, 5-6 years in life, and life has moved on and new things have come up as a result of, us seeing where those, sort of issues are. And so we've started a list of additional projects that, we started to cost out and, begin to think when they would need to get done and things along those lines. But those are just the beginning of new projects that we've been identifying, as a result of day-to-day operation of the buildings that may or may not have been in the original Sebago Technics report.
thank you.
Yeah.
So, process-wise, perhaps if there's any further clarifying questions that any committee members have, please ask them. And then if we could just get reactions from the committee members after that, and then we could probably conclude this section of tonight, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So first, any clarifying questions from the committee? Okay. Reactions from the committee. Your thoughts on this this draft proposal of requesting $2 million in CIP in the next budget. Member Ryden?
I'm taking over the meeting. I apologize.
You're fine.
No, I mean, I think that as Member Grant alluded to a little bit, you're just deferring to staff feels like, I mean, you folks know your stuff and you've been doing this much longer than I've been on this committee. So, so as a general principle, I think that, that feels like the right path. And thank you so much for your patience as I ask so many questions. I really appreciate it.
Please ask questions. We do better work when questions get asked.
Yeah.
Chair Figdor.
I always really struggle with the CIP, as some folks know, because it is so inadequate to meet our facilities needs, including, urgent life safety and other priorities. But I agree with Sarah that this, given all of the challenges, this looks like a good path forward. So I'm supportive of this approach.
Thanks, Chair. Member Grant?
Yeah, I don't see any reason to disrupt what's going on here. Like I said before, I'm happy to accept the staff recommendation about what's most important and needs addressing now versus year or 2 years from now. So I'm good to go.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I have lots of conflicts. Like the stuff needs to get done. It's not enough. We have a ton of stuff that we are not moving on that's funded. This conversation is pretty reminiscent of last year of projects not moving forward, but still going for more. So I just have conflicts. But at this stage, proceeding towards seeing if I hear the comments that there is momentum in the roof project, and there's, we're engaged with somebody. It's not like we're waiting for bids and that sort of stuff. So it feels different than some projections previous of that we should be able to get some stuff done. So I wouldn't want to interrupt that momentum. So continuing forward with this being the idea and seeing what's viable as you talk with the city and bringing it forward as part of our ongoing conversations. Once you have more information, it's fine with me. Chair Figdor.
I just had one more thing, and for kind of setting the stage. And so this is going back, and my apologies for it, but Mr. Superintendent, I'm not sure that you mentioned the charter changes that would affect the CIP process, and it might be good just to review those, or I could do that.
Why don't you do that? Because I'm not 100% sure where those landed, given question 2 and all of that stuff. So that's where I a lot of my.
I believe those changes are in question 2, and I can clarify that after the meeting. But the changes that the Charter Commission passed to the CIP process have the superintendent sitting down with city leaders. I believe it still is I believe it's a city manager. Again, with the change in structure that's been proposed, I'm not sure how that ended up, but essentially the superintendent, the school district is sitting down with the city to develop a plan together, rather than just getting some input from us as part of the process. We're more of a partner in developing it, and the idea being that we have a really large capital footprint, and it is very hard for us as there's lots of challenges right now, in part because of the construction market and all of that, but the bigger picture is that we're nowhere near meeting our capital needs. So the idea of us being just a more of an equal participant in the conversation, given our large capital footprint across the city. And I can confirm after this meeting where those changes ended up, but I do believe it was question 2.
It's Chair Figdor. Okay. So we have what we need from this part of the conversation, right?
And I think what that means then is that we will come back to you at the November meeting with the formal request. We'll do, I think, what Member Braden asked for, which is this sort of running this up against our priorities. Just, even if we, and I'm fairly confident that these other items, none of, very few of them are life safety type issues, but, to sort of look at, why is it that we have the reworking the corridors and lockers at Lincoln as a priority? Where does that figure? Was it because, so we can do that analysis, and you'll have that information for this group of projects, which I think is always helpful to do. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that life safety prioritization was part of what was used as the scalpel last year to still try to move forward on some things, understanding that we were building up a backlog. So I feel confident that we've kind of caught those, but good to sweep to make sure that we're not missing anything.
Yeah.
Stephen, thank you as always for helping us zoom in and out of the details here and understand the reality of getting really complicated work done. Tamara, thanks for taking us through a thick wall of information and making us able to take it bite by bite. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I sign off?
Do you want me to stop sharing, give it back, or? Yeah, okay.
Awesome. Okay. So next,
can Stephen and Tamara sign off, Superintendent?
Yeah, you guys, thank you.
Yeah, thank you both.
All right, so we're gonna do the update on our finance reorganization, and starting with the audit status. And so Terry is going to walk us through both of those items.
Good evening, everyone. I apologize if some of this is repetitive. I said to Javier, between the previous meeting, the city council meeting we attended, it feels like some of the things I've said already, but so I apologize up front.
I said, welcome to my life.
Yeah. So we have a meeting tomorrow with the auditors to kind of kick off the next audit. And we'll have a chance to ask them questions, and they'll have a chance to offer us feedback based on the previous audit. So we're happy to be starting with that tomorrow. One of the things I want to stress is that the audit's been front and center since I've started in Portland at central office. It's something that we're constantly looking to work as we move through the changes that we need to make. So we started off pretty quickly with trying to hire people, because that was one of the changes that the board approved, and it was really important that we were able to fill in some of the holes that had developed over the years. And then with people coming and going, we really wanted to get those positions filled. So we hired a grant manager, we hired a payroll specialist, and we also hired a purchasing manager. So grant manager and payroll specialists have been on board for a couple of weeks. And then the purchasing manager is an internal hire. So we need to kind of find a way to transition her out of her old position and into her new position. So we're working on that. We have a grant accountant that we get through an agency, Robert Half. So right now we didn't want to disrupt that, because she had been on board for a few months and is able to kind of fill that need of following the accounting, following the purchases through the grants, and keeping us updated with what we spent and what we still need to spend. One of the things I've definitely shared before is, when I started, I did what I call an entry plan. And so I met with all the members of the team in the finance department, interviewed them all. And I did that in HR. I did that with food service. So it gives you a kind of a sense of what are the strengths and what are the challenges for the department. And one of the things that consistently came up were challenges with Munis, which is the software that the city and the schools use. And so I've spent quite a bit of time really trying to dig into that and trying to find ways to get that to work better for us. And so we've had several meetings, and the meeting that I'm trying now to put together is between the city, the schools, and Tyler Technologies, so the city can hear firsthand what changes they need to make so that the software works better for us. And so I'm working on that, and I'm hoping we'll be able to do that next week. And then if everybody's comfortable with that, then they'll do it's like a 3 to 4 day investment assessment of the software, so they can identify for us where the holes are, and then help us address those issues. As well as doing that, we've also had conversations, and I know I shared this as well, with about outsourcing payroll. So we have a meeting on Monday where we're going to look at the HR. We've looked at the payroll side of things, and then we're going to look at the HR side of things to see what they have to offer, so that we can improve the flow between the two departments when we're hiring people. As far as the audit, the issues that were raised in the audit, things that we've done. So we worked on our accounts payable process, and now we have authorized workflow for all purchases and invoices, which wasn't always the case before. So we've done that. We've updated standard operating procedures. We've retrained people in how to do it. One of the other items in the audit that was brought up were the purchasing cards and how we were managing those. And I, as a principal, hated the purchasing cards and really never wanted to use them because it's just a very clunky process for, you know, getting your receipts, uploading your receipts, sending them to the central office so that they could approve your monthly statement. And so we haven't given out any new P cards. We're working to streamline the system and get it in line with what the auditors, you know, expect to see. Some of that has to do with being able to merge them with Munis so that when you use your P card, the deduction can come right from your operating budget at your school. So there's a lot of clunkiness and a lot of steps. And so we want to be able to tighten that up and, you know, be able to retrain principals. And then when schools aren't following the procedures, suspend the use of their card until they are. Another thing that came up in the audit was the accrual of the vacation and sick time. So those have been reconciled, and we've reworked their accrual tables as well. So those have been fixed and those have been adjusted. We still need to work on the sick bank. That's the next part of that where we have to work on reconciling those. And then healthcare premiums have been reconciled and adjusted. Another big one was the activity accounts. And each school has an activity account. And as a principal, I could use that account for, you know, different things. Part of it was PTO funded, and part of it was, you know, money for unexpected things that go wrong in the office, like you need a fax machine. No, well, you don't need a fax machine so much anymore, but you know what I mean. So you had your own account which you managed. So what we used to have to do is we had to, you know, go through our account, reconcile it, and send it into central office. So what we've done is we've pulled it all under one umbrella through the city so that all of the statements, all of the information for each school comes to us first, and then we send it out to the schools. And what that does is it allows us not to have to track them down. You know, you're trying to get the July reconciliation from a school. It's pretty hard to do because people aren't around. So they start with us and then they go to the schools. So I think that oversight is not going to feel any different to the schools, but from the auditor's perspective, it allows us to have a much tighter handle on those accounts. And then payroll, where, you know, I joke with the people in payroll, when you run a school, if you don't do something really well, you can say, okay, well, we'll refigure it out over the summer, and then in the fall, we'll start new, like our dismissal procedures. We'll just get through the year, and then we'll fix it over the summer and relaunch it and reteach the kids how to do it. In this world, you can't just push stop and fix things. You kind of have to do it as you go because you still have to pay people. So that's really what we're doing with payroll. We're trying to fix things as we go. We definitely have bumps every payroll cycle with things that have happened. And, you know, sometimes it's on payroll, sometimes it's on HR, sometimes it's on the school, and sometimes it's on the employee. So it's really about if we stay with our own payroll department, it's about getting our processes in place and teaching schools, principals, admin assistants, employees what they need to do so that we can pay them accurately. And so that's just an ongoing process. So overall, I feel like we've accomplished a lot, but we still have a lot to do. So any questions?
First of all, thank you. When we first got into the audit, I don't know, but as I was saying earlier, the COVID seems to put a fold in time where it was either yesterday or 3 years ago. So we'll just say it was 3 years ago, even though that's not by any means true. This was very concerning to me, and we talked about a correction plan, and I'm glad to see we're on track with that. One thing I didn't hear mentioned tonight, but I did hear from the superintendent previously, and just to give you credit, Terry, that I heard that there was some conversations with Munis that you've already had that have provided opportunity to make improvements to this point, which is setting you up for now having things as far as you could take them without having this next meeting that you're trying to have next week. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's there, I can't even get into the technological side of it. It's, it's not something I have a firm grasp on, but, basically Tyler made some recommendations to both sides that both sides chose not to follow. And so it has created some problems. And so I think the changes they're recommending will make a huge difference. But I joked with the city, I joked with Brendan. I said, I don't want to be on the Press Herald because the city's payroll's messed up because of something, I suggested. I want to make sure they're on board. They understand what Tyler needs to do to kind of separate the two so they can function better for us. So I think we all need to come together with Tyler just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Oh, great. Thank you. Anybody else have questions for Terry? Chair Figdor?
I guess I would just like to be appraised of how that conversation goes. And if there is challenges on the city side, I definitely would want to know and figure out how the board might be able to help if needed, try to resolve those issues.
Sure. Is that something I would share after the meeting or wait till our next meeting?
We can talk about it. I mean, again, I'm going to just go from the assumption that we're going to be able to work through those issues. And, I will definitely keep the board updated as I do on, major issues on an ongoing basis. And if there's obviously a need to elevate it beyond so that it's, something that gets more visibility and, your advocacy will obviously do that as well. So we can figure out, you guys know me, I'm always the eternal optimist. I think everything is going to go swimmingly and that
that is not true, Javier.
It is so not true. But for today, I'm playing the optimist. So,
I mean, I agree. I'm confident. I don't think what we're asking or Tyler's suggesting is anything out of left field. I think it's very doable.
Could I just ask a follow-up?
The thing that I do, I just want to, again, commend Terry on this in particular, and is the fact that we are at this juncture because for as long as we've had Munis, we've had challenges with Munis, and time and again we said so should we be talking to Tyler and trying to figure out what's going on? And every time it was no, wait, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. And it's sort of Terry said, well, I don't want to really just continue to wait and, hope that doing X is going to solve, And so the fact that we actually got them at the table and we started down this road is something that has been, 4 years of, lost time. So I really, can't, and it's Terry and it's Kim, the first person that has actually said yes, let's by all means, let's get them at the table and hounded them until they actually showed up. So.
Thank goodness someone turned the light on instead of bumping around in the dark. Chair Figdor, do you have another question or comment?
And thank you so much. It sounds like the work you're doing, Terry, is really invaluable. I guess the one just follow-up I have is, do we have any understanding of why we didn't take Tyler's recommendations at the time that that we started using that we set up the system?
I mean, what I can say is as I talk to people, I was kind of prepared in my mind for to be able to say to Tyler, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do this and you didn't do this. And so when they pulled out the recommendations that they gave and the concerns that they had, I was kind of like, oh, so it really is on us. And I think the city has fewer problems with Munis than we do, but they still have problems with it. They still talk about things that frustrate them with it. So it's not just us, but it's really hard, because one of the things I asked is, I remember at the time there was always this talk about efficiencies, like where can we find efficiencies between the city and the schools. So I wondered if that was behind it, if that was partly some of it, like, oh, if we just do this all in one. But they didn't remember it that way. And when I talked to the people in the city, they didn't remember it being about efficiencies either. So I don't really know. And most of the people who were kind of part of that on both sides of the equation have moved on. So it's really hard to kind of nail down why that is. And I kind of just decided after a point to just say, okay, that doesn't matter. Like, at this moment in time, we need this to work better, and we need to do everything we can to make it work better. And if we do that and we get to the point where, we feel like payroll needs to be outsourced, then that's what we should do. And when I started, there was one person who could run payroll. And that, of course, freaked me out, because one person had just left. There's one person who could run payroll. And we immediately started training another person, Kim, so she could run payroll if something happened. And sure enough, one of our people in payroll got hurt and is unable to run payroll. So thank goodness we did that. But that's scary to me. That's the kind of thing I worry about. And to me, that's the benefit of an ADP, is that, we don't have to carry the payroll to the finish line every other week. There's somebody helping us do that. So.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other
All right.
questions? Oh, okay. So I think there's just one more item on the agenda, the update on superintendent search, correct?
And it's just to have it on here. I know that tomorrow is the deadline for search firm applications to come in. We have 3 firms that have submitted their applications already. So I expect that we will get, at least one, maybe more. I know that Chair Figdor and Janet are collaborating on getting out a calendar poll with members of the search committee, the community and board members, to try to fix a couple of dates to begin that process. And I spoke to our attorney today, who will be, doing the initial training with the committee on, the rules and sort of best practices around a process like this one, issues of confidentiality, equity, things along those lines. So that will be scheduled as part of that first date. So I think we're true to the calendar and schedule that we had set out at the beginning, and the board, as you know, will be appointing the last member of the search committee from somebody representing PEA. Portland Adult Ed.
Chair Figdor.
Yeah, Adam, maybe one of us should just go through what our goal is in terms of having a firm on board.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So we're hoping to have the decision before the board, so that the search committee will very quickly start to do its work and do some interviews of finalists in the second half of November, and have a recommendation to the board in time for the board to make a final decision before the end of the year. So that then we can use the end of the year and early January to finish all of the kind of legal work that's needed to get the contract all signed and then transition in the new year to the search firm, really rolling up its sleeves and doing the work with us. So it's a pretty aggressive schedule. We'll see if we can, some of it is going to be contingent on being able to schedule meetings. So hopefully we can meet that schedule.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Any questions on the search committee process? No. Great. Well, thank you. A dense meeting. CIP is so many details and so important at the same time. So please extend my gratitude to the folks that were with us earlier again, Javier and Terry. Just really so refreshing to hear the progress that you've made, your experience as a principal. You're starting off with listening and just asking the questions and willing to also be humbled by things turning out differently than what you might expect and not getting defensive about it. Yeah. Appreciate all that about you. And I'm grateful that we're breaking through the ice here on some of these issues and we're in a different place already. And I look forward to finishing up this kind of, it's never finished, of course, but, right. Getting into a completely new baseline for where we are. I appreciate all your effort there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Superintendent, any last words from you?
Nope. Okay. Thank you all for your attention. It is a tremendously dense meeting, so I appreciate, and I appreciate Adam in particular, sort of, guiding us through that, what could have become a very item by item, taking up a lot more time than it needed to. So I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Finishing right on time too.
Here we go.
He nailed it.
Thanks everybody. We're adjourned. Have a great evening.